All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 18 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban. I'm clearly indoors. Joining us today, who is clearly outdoors, is
Jamie Flinchbaugh, sitting out at my favorite spot to enjoy whiskey, which I thought, whiskey's about who you drink it with as well as where you drink it. So I thought I'd hit my favorite spot.
a little porch sitting and sipping.
Yep.
Perfect. I'm in my office. Maybe I'll experiment with, maybe I'll sit outside next time.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't have a habit of drinking in the office, but with this, I can continue to, instead of closing up shop in the office, I can continue to sit here on the porch and pour another glass after we're done.
Yeah. The home office, clearly, 4:20 in the afternoon in LA. Normally I wouldn't be having a drink this early or in the office, but it's lean whiskey. So
it's lean whiskey. You got to do what you got to do. So, yeah. Well, before we get into the whiskey itself, which is always a big start, we wanted to pay a little tribute. So a man we both know, Bill Hanson, passed away last week. He was one of the co-founders of the Leaders for Manufacturing program at MIT that we both went to separate years, now called Leaders for Global Operations. So he was VP of DEC, I believe, when the program was founded. And then when he retired from DEC, he came on staff and really represented industry in the program. 80 years old and really a great guy. I have a lot of fond memories, but my own story around him. So I was always the first one in the office. I'd get up early, take the first bus on Mass Ave to the Red Line and the first train of the day in, and turn the lights on in the office and start a pot of coffee. And more than an occasional occurrence, he and I would be the only ones in the office. He'd be the first staff member to arrive, and I'd end up in his office chatting away, talking about all kinds of stuff, just whatever we felt like. But really was a tremendous mentor in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And I can remember, I can still picture going in. Bill's office was next, if I'm remembering this right, next to Don Rosenfeld's office. So one of the other co-directors, and Don, we lost Don too soon, about a year, 2 years ago.
I want to say 2, but I just can't remember.
But, the structure of the program had, representatives from engineering school, business school, and industry. And like you said, Bill Hanson had a very accomplished career. And, I really admired Bill and that experience that he brought in. And, there were times where I certainly took him up on his open door policy and having conversations about what I thought, a career, at least first steps coming out of MIT, could and should be, and what types of organizations I was going to try to find. So I just remember him being a very welcoming, friendly presence who you could tell was, really invested in his students. This wasn't just a job to keep busy, that there was a real commitment there.
There really was. And that commitment continued after you left. I had actually formed, when I graduated, a personal advisory board. It was kind of a semi-structured way to hold myself accountable for engaging with people I thought were very helpful for me thinking about my career. And I honestly don't remember if it was Bill's idea or he was simply the first member of it, but he was the first member of it for sure. And I engaged with him regularly after our graduation for several years. So he really believed in what we call the big L of leadership, not just how to lead a team of people, but how to leave a legacy and have a purpose and things like that. He really did believe those things. So we'll toast our friend Bill and move on to whiskey.
Yes. We'll have our sip here. And as strange as having a sip, I decided to talk about having a sip. There'll be time for more sips while Jamie's talking. So our theme today, we are on Scotch and more specifically, we are in the Islay region, is what we are both drinking today. So we did an episode on Speyside previously, right?
Yep. Yeah, and so I think, what's interesting about Scotch, I think even more than bourbon and other whiskeys, is the combination of the variation from distiller to distiller, but then also region to region, more more broadly. And there's no question that this region has a bit of a style to it. Certainly, with some peat and other things, but each one's different. But you can I probably could blindfold taste one from this region, and because it has its own style.
Yeah, there's that peaty style. You can get fooled. Like, I had an opportunity to tour, as we talked about before, the Speyside region, and occasionally you will find a peated Speyside whiskey. So
sure.
You can get crossed up. And I don't know off the top of my head, is there anyone, so this is where you have a podcast where we're not whiskey world experts. There's got to be someone in the Islay region who's being a contrarian and not using peat.
Probably, although they might get run off as they take some of that pretty seriously. But I think we chose. I forget if this is why we chose Speyside, but you had visited and toured, and I've been to Scotland, but always for work, and I never really got to tour, which is a shame. Yeah. But you haven't been to Islay.
I have not. And, we did, my wife and I did Speyside region on my 40th birthday. And it had been my plan, for a 50th birthday to go back and maybe instead of Edinburgh, spend time in Glasgow and closer to the Islay region, which is a lot harder to get to. I think a boat is involved,
yes,
right on the coast. And so I can only hope that things get back to some semblance of normal, where I can still do that in late 2023. So put that up on the goals board. But if we can't go and visit, at least we can sample what's shipped over here from that region.
That's right. I mean, there are a lot of highly established brands in that region, I think Talisker was for some reason was sort of a gateway for me from having a couple Balvenies and a couple of different simpler scotches.
Balvenie Speyside.
Right. And so some softer, I'll say, scotches. And I think Talisker was sort of my gateway to a broader world of scotch. And that's what got me interested, I think, in trying all sorts of different things. So I drank Talisker as regularly for quite a while, but now it's not even any on my shelf because I have so many other fun things to try.
Yeah. Talisker comes to mind, Laphroaig, Lagavulin, and the other that would come to mind, this is one I'm actually drinking today, is from the Ardbeg distillery. This is their 10-year Islay single malt Scotch. And the one thing that's interesting about Ardbeg is that they've got many expressions.
Yep.
A lot of them have names that are very Gaelic or Scottish. A bit of a challenge to pronounce. Ardbeg rolls off the tongue
right
pretty easily. But so this is their 10-year whiskey, kind of typical peated. On the bottle here it says, you're getting sea spray. I don't know what terry rope is, but immense smoky intensity. Boy, I'm 2 sips in, having trouble talking. Immense smoky intensity. So I think it's that region is certainly known for the peatiness. And for those who are watching on the YouTube, I'll hold my glass up, and I think this is often surprising to people that you would you would have an impression that a peated smoked barley whiskey would somehow be darker in color, and that's not true. The smoke drying of the malted barley isn't adding color; it's the barrels.
Right.
And so this is a fairly lightly colored. You can't tell by looking at it. You put your nose anywhere near the glass, and it's polarizing. My wife she doesn't care for peated whiskey. That's just a palate preference.
Yeah, and that's definitely, everybody's got to find their preference, and peat is in my rotation, but it isn't. I like it. I don't seek it, but for some, it's an absolute no. And I have to admit, I only tried Ardbeg for the first time maybe 2 years ago, and I have a really interesting bottle right now, and it's one of those. I don't have it with me on the porch, but it's
those funky names.
It's one of those funky names that I even before our show here, I looked at and said, "Can I remember how to pronounce this?" I'm not even sure if I know how to pronounce it while looking at it, let alone otherwise. But it is fantastic. I really enjoy Ardbeg. And I'll be seeking out other varieties of theirs. So,
yeah. And before we talk about yours, I was just going to add one interesting bit of trivia about Ardbeg. Actually, I was out with a friend of mine. I was in Phoenix for work, and we went out to have a drink. And Ardbeg had a promotional semi-truck trailer out in the parking lot of this whiskey bar that we had gone to. And on the inside, they had this little mini museum display of what they basically called their space whiskey. And there was a vial, and they sent a vial of whiskey to the International Space Station in 2011. I think it was up there for a couple of years, and an honest to goodness scientific experiment of how weightlessness would somehow change the whiskey. And my belief is, they're going to take whatever volume of whiskey that was and put a drop in a bunch of different bottles and sell it as the space whiskey. Maybe that's an unfair accusation, but
no, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think if you really want to test that, it's you got to send a barrel up, and it's got to age, right? Mm-hmm. It can't just be a vial that's nothing's going to happen to it. So it's and interestingly, we talk about temperature variation while aging, and the barrel does this ebb and flow in and out of the whiskey. And while space, the temperature changes a lot. I'd imagine inside the International Space Station, it's pretty temperature controlled. So not sure that's a useful experiment either.
No.
But why not, right? Somebody's got to be the first whiskey to space. So
what are you're having the Talisker? You mentioned no.
I'm having Lagavulin. So the 16, which to me is a really good year for Lagavulin. I think there's certain whiskeys where you keep going up in age and it gets worse. Others where it plateaus, but of course the price doesn't plateau; it just keeps shooting up.
Yeah.
I think 16 is a sweet spot for this particular whiskey. It's not wildly expensive. It's really sort of broad and complex. It's got a great nose on it. I've always been bad at tasting notes, but I can tell you what I like. Now this is a darker color, but again, as you said, not because of the peat. In fact, they actually argue that because the waters rush through the peat bogs, that the water that they distill with is already peated water.
Interesting.
And so it's not about adding peat to the whiskey. It's simply what it does from the smoking, from the water, from other factors. But this is definitely, if you're and I'll say an amateur because we're all amateurs, but if you're an early whiskey drinker, it's unlikely this will be your glass. It's definitely got a bit of peat monster to it. But like I said, it's not harsh. Laphroaig can be harsh. That can be just hammer to the face. But this, I don't think it's harsh. It's just strong in the taste, but it still has a lot of different flavors to it, a lot of complexity, and a pretty long finish, which I like as well.
And now a word from our sponsor, Laphroaig. Oh, nope. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't had Laphroaig for a while.
Right?
T-Churro, and I did like Laphroaig for a while. As I was exploring peat, I mean, you got to go down the pathway of Laphroaig. But I think to a degree, it's hey, if you like peat, then more is better, and it seems to be a bit of the Laphroaig style. Which again, for somebody that loves peat, that's great. If you think it's a variable that adds complexity and differences, then probably not your whiskey either.
Yeah, there's one that I've had. I had a bottle years ago. They do different releases. The Bruichladdich distillery does one called Octamore, which is by they measure the peat concentration in parts per million and scientifically measured it as the most heavily peated whiskey in the world. And they call that, it's for bragging rights and marketing. And yeah, it's interesting, but I'm not going to sip that every day.
Right. And the Lagavulin, I'm not going to probably go to every day, but interestingly, it's probably been the most consistently shelved bottle for me over the last 3 to 4 years, and specifically the 16. It's been rare that I don't have a bottle. I don't go through it super fast, but when I do, and I'm batch ordering or buying a set of whiskeys, be sure I'll probably pick another one up. So
cool. All right. Well, cheers.
Cheers
to our friends in the Islay region. I hope to get there someday.
Me too. You're lucky. Your wife will taste whiskey with you. Mine will not. So it makes the trip quite unlikely, at least for the two of us. So we're, as always, we're going to go from whiskey to news. And there's, of course, plenty of news out there to speak of. But before we get into our selected topic, you actually have some interesting news about your blog.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're going to talk about an article that Jamie found, but Jamie also suggested, thank you for this, mentioning kind of a special week on leanblog.org. Starting on Friday, I'm going to have a blog post introducing the series. But sometimes brands do what's called a social media takeover, where some consumer brand or some with a lot of followers hands over the social media feed to a cause. Give exposure. And I had this idea sort of come to me. I'm calling it a blog handover because takeover sounds forced, right? So I'm handing over the blog to Deandra Wardell, who I was familiar with on LinkedIn. We were connected. She's in Indianapolis. And I'd seen her postings about lean. But now, in recent months, I think going back to June is when we started really talking about this. She had made some posts, which can be brave to do on LinkedIn, sharing some very personal reflections from her standpoint as a Black woman, how she felt professionally and personally, in these times where we have the deaths, the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and others. It's such a long list. So Breonna Taylor and anyway, long list and her thoughts on that. And some of the reaction from some people on LinkedIn was unfortunate to see. Other middle-aged white men like me being, I think kind of, dismissive of her experiences. And so I think in terms of lean thinking, we're supposed to respect people, and that means listening and understanding their perspectives, right? So let me bring it back to workplace for a minute. Jamie, if you're running manufacturing operations somewhere and somebody comes to your office, if they could catch you there, but let's say they caught you in your office and somebody came in and was wanting to tell you about a safety problem on the shop floor, I know you wouldn't sit there and just be dismissive and say, no, it's not unsafe.
Right. You listen, you hear somebody's experience and you investigate objectively and solve what you can as aggressively as you can. It's the natural reaction you should have when there's a problem.
Yeah. So, in the spirit of the blog handover was, for one, I came to Deandra with this idea. Would you like to take over the blog for a week, and you can write whatever you like about lean or otherwise, and maybe others. Well, she took this idea and ran with it. She's recruited, I think the count is like 15 or 16 authors, all women, some white women, some black women, writing about, to different degrees and different combinations of topics that are sometimes incorporating continuous improvement and issues involving race and equity and inclusion. So the spirit of a blog handover is, hey, it's your blog, and I want to hear different perspectives and voices. So it's part of my attempt to maybe better understand the current condition, if you will. I mean, it's been a long-standing condition. Because I think kind of understanding the problem and having discussions about that is the first step toward figuring out what comes next. So I'm very appreciative of Deandra and the others who have come forward to write. We're going to do a panel webinar discussion that KaiNexus is hosting on Friday the 14th.
On Friday. Yep.
And we're going to have 9 of us, nine women, and then I'll be moderating. So my role will be really just to facilitate that discussion, because and let them share their perspectives. But then the one other thing I'm contributing this next week is a podcast in my Lean blog interview series, where I'd reached out to Randall Pinkett, and there's an MIT connection and there's a Jamie connection that I know you'll speak to. But Randall Pinkett, among other things, was the first black winner of The Apprentice with Donald Trump's show, and he's got 5 degrees, including a PhD from MIT. He wasn't done after the Leaders for Manufacturing program degrees.
No, he doubled down. He's an impressive mind.
Yes, and so I reached out to Randall, say, hey, could we do a podcast about these issues? And he brought in Professor Jeffrey Robinson from Rutgers Business School, and they co-authored a book some years ago called Black Faces in White Places. They're working on a new book called Black Faces in High Places. And so that podcast is something I'm going to release as well next week. And I got a story. I don't know if it's a news story related to The Apprentice that he probably hasn't told anywhere else, about rewatching the series with his daughter, who wasn't even born yet,
right,
when he was on the show.
Yep.
So that's a bit of a teaser for that podcast. There's a lot of serious issues and to discuss there. So I appreciate them making time for the podcast.
Yeah, I think so just speaking to Randy, he was a classmate of mine at MIT, and I remember we had watched some of The Apprentice, and it seemed like a bit of just a little bit of backhanded gamemanship for the reality TV show, and get lucky and go big when you need to and impress the right people. And when Randy was on the show, I remember thinking, he's both too smart and too nice a guy to win, because it really didn't seem like being such a nice guy was a good thing on that particular show, and he really is a fantastically nice guy. So it's good to see his opportunity to speak out. I know he has been for years. Mm-hmm. He's been a strong voice in lots of communities, but in many times speaking to the Black community, and a lot of us, I think, have learned quite a bit this year about our role in not just listening but speaking and engaging. So I think this week of root cause racism will be really interesting. Like any complex problem, there's no single root cause. You You have to break down systems and redesign work and understand culture and, really, really complex things. There's no magic wand. There's no single cure. And so I do think that while I'm not predicting that lean will end racism, I think it can solve parts of it in unique ways, in ways that the thought process that lean brings can perhaps enlighten new solutions. And so I'm hopeful to see the momentum built out of this blog takeover, and I'll certainly be tuning in to see what comes of it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I would invite listeners to check that out. And as you mentioned, Jamie, Deandra came up with a theme of hashtag #RootCauseRacism. So that's the theme for the blog posts. Deandra's posting hers on Saturday, August 8th, which is a date that's meaningful to her. And she's going to share why that is in that first blog post. We're going to have blog posts on the weekends, multiple blog posts a day, which is a bit unusual, but I'm really happy to have all that participation and to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, great program. Looking forward to seeing all the collected voices there. So
thank you for wanting to talk about that here. So now Jamie found an article or some articles, but a theme. Let you go ahead and introduce that.
Yeah. So really starting from the beginning of the thought process is, with everybody working from home, dealing with sort of the chaos at work and everything else, numerous times I've had conversations with executives where they are in video meetings 10, 12 hours a day. And then, try and catch up on email. Fortunately, so many people are in all of these video meetings. They don't have time for generating email that you have to respond to. So
unless they're doing the dreaded multitasking thing.
Well, and there's a ton of that, right? Which means every meeting is less effective and longer than it needs to be. And, I even had a conversation today with someone that says, yeah, I'm supposed to be in another discussion right now. So whenever we're done, I'll join that. And essentially, while a lot is being learned, not enough is being learned about how to work remotely. And I think if you stop and think about just working remotely temporarily, and you either think about it as working remotely permanently, not that we plan to, or that we think about redesigning work based on what we're learning, then you get to this idea of learning more about asynchronous work, where not everything has to happen while everybody being in the same place at the same time and work together. And that's what these series of articles are about. And I've been doing, I can share some of this, but I've been doing a lot of this for years. Not always well, but certainly got to for reasons got to delve into asynchronous work quite early in the opportunities to do so.
Yeah, and the one article, and we'll, of course, as always, link to this in the show notes. The one article Jamie brought to the table here was from Forbes.com. What if working from home could be different to how it's been till now? And they talk about the company Automatic, which creates WordPress software, which I use quite a bit. I think your website.
Yep, mine as well.
Is WordPress. And Matt Mullenweg, the founder, talks about 5 levels of autonomy and so I think getting to level 5 nirvana, he describes it as consistently perform better than any in-person organization could. So I'm wearing my KaiNexus hat tonight, talking to the co-founders, Greg Jacobson and Matt Palulis. They had reflected that they thought the company, now that it's a completely virtual company, at this point, I think they ballparked it at about 90%, 85, 90, just picking numbers, right?
Yeah.
Almost as effective as being in the office. But then I think it's interesting that Mullenweg raises the challenge of no, we should actually try to be more effective. Or at least that's possible.
And I think that's the question. I have a video coming up. It's basically called Delay, modify or redesign. And basically for things that have been delayed because of COVID, well, you have to make a decision. Do I just continue to delay? Do I modify it just to get a highest percentage as possible of the regular value? Or do I redesign it to get more than I did before? And I'm seeing with a lot of work that's what we should learn. I was talking to somebody very recently, I think it was Monday. They said, yeah, our daily huddles, the team on the floor takes a photo of the board. We talk about it. We go through our daily huddle remotely, and it's more focused and it's better than it's ever been. And then it was, but what happens when we go back, right? What do we just go back to where we were before, or can we learn from this and make it, better still? And I think so. I'm working on client servicing engagement strategies where I'm trying to design sort of workshops that aren't just they're not even meant to accommodate remote because of COVID. They're meant to solve the problems that exist with in-person workshops and do it better than before. And I think that's I think once you get into looking at the day-to-day work, I think it's the only approach is to think about how to make it even better. And the key point of the asynchronous is that not all work is best done synchronously.
And I think it's an opportunity. We think about automation, and we always say, don't automate the waste. Don't just digitize what's being done now. Let's reinvent it, right? So the first phase of, let's say, virtual conferences, which are happening now. On Tuesday, the Shingo Institute ran something they call a virtual experience. I think it was a bit of a dry run in different ways, because in October, they're going to do a virtual conference across 2 days. Right. And so they invited me to speak, and they had 30-minute talks with 15 minutes in between, but it was pretty much a conference format. But we were all on Zoom and all on there synchronously. And so I'm not trying to be critical of them, but I think it's interesting to rethink now, this challenge of if we had each recorded our presentations and they had been sent out to people, and everyone was told basically, look, you've got 5 days to carve out the time to watch this 6 hours worth of presentation. And then we're going to get together on Friday for virtual discussions. That's a different type of experience. And it'd be interesting, or maybe we can experiment with that instead of just thinking out loud about it.
Yeah, and I'm trying to do 2 or 3 or 10 experiments every single week, and with the kind of things that you and I often do. I did a talk with some students at Lehigh University last week, where rather than just do the standard get up and talk for a while and then take a few questions of whoever's bold enough to speak at that point, I had them actually on a Miro board, which is my current preferred tool. While I'm speaking, they captured insights in all of them, simultaneously capturing insights and capturing questions. And then they voted on each other's stuff. And then that's the stuff that I reacted to at the end. And it was still in that, we still had a synchronous meeting, but we had asynchronous work going on in the background. Yeah. And I used to run a consulting firm, which we had people in 3 continents and 4 time zones. And we very rarely had to have, meetings, because we mastered, the communication. I don't say we mastered, that's just wrong. We really strive towards asynchronous communication and systems of work that allowed us to be clear about when help was needed, what we're working on, our productivity, our priorities, and all of those things. And then, when it became pretty clear when a meeting would be needed as the exception to the work rather than the primary purpose of doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's interesting to step back and think, all right, what is the work? And how can we accomplish it differently? So I'm thinking again about KaiNexus. We do twice a year team meetings. The team's grown to about 20 people now. And so, everyone would come to Austin. So there's a Dallas office, there's me, there's a couple other people who are remote virtual employees. We'd all get together in Austin and come into the office, and each function and different people within the different functions would basically give PowerPoint presentations to everybody in the room. Yeah. And there would be some discussion, but then, we're falling behind schedule, so we don't have time for that. So it ends up being a lot of PowerPoint. Now, it's great to see people face to face, and we have meals and go out and do social things, and that's great. But for a while, I've been sort of banging the drum, suggesting, all right, the PowerPoint updates, just send those out, let people read them. Mm-hmm. Or to this idea that's come up from the articles you sent out of doing it asynchronously. If you're going to spend the time presenting, present and record it through Zoom by yourself, blast it out to people, and tell people, carve out time in your calendar, because that's probably the biggest risk, right? When we're all in the office, it's captive audience, even though there might be multitasking, right? People have to listen. But we're adults, we can be professionals and say, okay, we're going to watch those updates. Now let's get together in person maybe for 2 days instead of 3. We'd save travel expense, and we can spend those days doing nothing but discussions and team building activities and things that really take advantage of being there. So recently, a couple of weeks ago, we did one of these as a virtual meeting. And again, it was very synchronous. So it'd be interesting, like later this year or in January, if we're still doing it that way, I'll talk to Greg and Matt, like let's experiment with trying to make it more of an asynchronous meeting. And let's use that time together for the magic that comes out of much more interactive discussions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think those types of designs make a big difference when you really think about what's the best format to convey information, what's the best format to collect your thoughts, what's the best format to ask questions, what's the best format to create, right? And so, just about every board of directors I've been on started with going into a board meeting, going through a standard deck. Every board meeting, here's the quarterly performance report, and we'd ask questions based on, we'll ask question based on slide 2, but all the meat's on slide 10. And yeah. but we're on slide 2, so you ask a question and then you get distracted for 30 minutes. And so if you can digest information, consider it, formulate thoughts around questions, prioritize those questions, and then have a dialogue, it's a much better way to get use of time where we put people together.
Yeah.
I look at examples where people forced a better way of working when they still thought they had to be synchronous. So one of my favorite examples of this is Jeff Bezos, whose name is dragged through the mud for a lot of his personal decisions, rightly so. But what instead of PowerPoint presentations and people coming in with a deck and pitching, they had memos, and they would sit in a circle at the meeting and say, okay, everybody read it. Yeah. Everybody would stop and they would read quietly, make notes in the margins, whatever. Okay, now you've considered the information, now have a discussion. And he really, again, he probably didn't have, maybe he did, but shouldn't have to have that time carved out of the meeting. But the key idea is, first consider the information, then discuss it. Don't try to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that when we are trying to discuss it all the time, then certain other things like prioritization and consideration and reflection get brushed under the rug a bit and not quite as effective.
Yeah. And then we talk about effectiveness. In this world of remote work, one of the articles you shared talked about this idea of digital monitoring, which just makes me cringe. are you really measuring someone's productivity in terms of how many keystrokes per hour they're putting into their computer? Maybe for certain jobs that matters, but it's much easier to measure activity than it is to measure outcomes. So you think about results-based workplaces, or different buzzwords or phrases that are used. I would really hate to work for an environment, for an organization where the environment was one where there's so little trust of like, oh, they're taking a random screenshot of what I'm doing every 5 minutes, or that kind of active monitoring. That's. I wouldn't want to be part of that. Not because I don't want people to see my screen, but I'm like, wow, like, do you trust me to be an adult professional? So there was one quote in the article that said, "This is the end of the culture of presenteeism and micromanagement." And I would add, I would only hope so.
Yeah, and I doubt it is. But I think there's some parts of work or certain types of work where that's probably just necessary, where there is no inherent redeeming value in the work, and measurement is output. Output equals outcomes, and they're the same things. And so when the work is narrow enough that that's true, that output equals outcomes, then you can put metrics in place for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when you get clear about outcomes, which really means working on the right stuff and producing results, then if you get smarter about measuring that or evaluating that at least, and this is even true for ourselves, then who cares about the hours it took? In fact, the hours are irrelevant. So I did a video recently on a personal waste walk just for fun, my morning routine, and most of them were really sort of stupid, silly, simple 2 seconds savings, which are fine, right? Nothing wrong with that at all. But I'll tell you that one of them was kind of game changing for me, and that is that every morning when I open up my computer, I first look at my calendar, I then look at my priority list, and then I look at my inbox. Only then do I look at my inbox. And I used to have 15 tabs open. Now I typically have 3 or 4. And it by making sure I'm clear before I touch my inbox about what's important, I am absolutely getting more outcome from my work. And I don't know how to measure it, other than the fact that fewer things get pushed on the calendar, fewer important priorities get pushed on the calendar. And I've never tracked it, but it's not hard to observe. You can see yourself doing it.
It seems like a good habit, a good practice.
Well, and I mentioned my old company where we had a team. This is before a lot of the technologies like Trello that we use, that I use a lot today. We've used Trello. I've used Trello for years, but we had a wiki. That was the tool of choice at the time. And everybody every week would write a list of their priorities for the week. And the standard was, if your priority for this week was a carryover from last week, you just highlighted it in red. That was it. You didn't beat yourself up. You didn't have to present a resolution plan. You just needed to highlight it in red that this priority for this week happened to be one from last week. And it just added to the transparency to yourself and to everybody else. And if help was needed, you could have that conversation, and that's when the phone call would start. But just a simple way to manage the work without ever having to have a meeting to review, did you get your work done, which is just not productive.
So we've got, are you going to put links to all 3 of the articles?
I'll put links to all 3. And I think I'll also put a link to it was interesting is the WordPress, didn't he write a book called The Year with No Pants?
Scott Burkun, how do you say it? Burkun.
Yeah, but it was about his shift to this asynchronous work. So The cover of the book is a picture of underwear, which is probably super appropriate for these days of work from home. But
well, I'm wearing workout shorts because I went out for a walk earlier and I didn't change.
I'm doing lean whiskey, and so it doesn't matter. Yeah, I am wearing shorts, but that's it's summer. I'm on the porch and I'm drinking whiskey, so I'm perfectly okay with that.
Scott Birkin also wrote a really entertaining, insightful book called Confessions of a Public Speaker. I highly recommend for anybody who does any amount of speaking. I remember I probably read that 8 or 10 years ago even.
Yeah, it's been around a while.
Entertaining stuff. So.
All right. So know your work, know what parts of your work matter, redesign your work, and don't just accept end-to-end meetings because we don't know what else to do. Yeah. We can do better.
And try to be asynchronous. So doing show notes and prep for a podcast in Google Docs is a good example of asynchronous work.
Yeah, we don't have 3 planning meetings for this. In fact, we the only time we've ever had a planning meeting, I think, is when we decided to call just for other reasons. And while we're on the phone, we talk about the next episode.
Yeah. Or maybe the very first discussion about, are we going to do this podcast or not? Right.
Now, I still remember when we decided to finally do this. I think it was in a hotel in Pittsburgh at the time. But yes, we planned the program, but yeah, we don't need to do a lot of our work sitting down together, and we can get it done at 10 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning or in the middle of the day or whatever works for us in whatever is the best setting.
Yep, definitely.
So
you want to talk about a listener question, which is sort of meta today. It's kind of I'm going to frame it as a question about questions.
That's fair. It's we'll get practical before too long. So that's a fine place to start.
And we do invite listeners and viewers to send us questions if there's something that you want us to answer and discuss. But the thing, I suggested to Jamie that we discuss in the vein of listener questions, was a question I think we probably both get a lot. I know I do. Dear Mark, or Dear Jamie, hopefully they don't send you an email that says Dear Mark. Sometimes maybe people send the same question to both of us and they do a awkward copy paste. But people will say, they'll ask, well, how does some other organization solve this problem that I have right now? And one example recently was, do you have any insights for our hospital about no meeting zones, like from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m.? This was something that was popularized in the lean healthcare movement some years ago, by ThedaCare and others. But anyway, do you have any insights on this no meeting zone concept in order to have managers be out on the Gemba, coaching their employees and doing huddles, because we're struggling with this? Can I get contact information from hospitals that could share their experiences with this practice? So I try to give what I think are constructive, helpful answers to that. But Jamie, what's an example of that question that you might get?
Yeah, I mean, I get everything from the broad version, which is, okay, for somebody that's in our general situation and level of maturity and lean, can you connect us to somebody that we can learn from so we can kind of, go down the path together, all the way to a specific question, which is actually better. At least it has a clear focal point around, hey, we want to learn about value stream improvement, or we want to learn about A3 coaching or whatever, right? So from the broad to the specific, but it is always, who can you connect us to benchmark? And for starters, which is never really a reason that I reject the request, is it's actually a lot harder than it sounds, right? Because you've got to inventory. Sometimes you can just go, oh, you should talk to this guy. But most of the times you've got to inventory, you've got to think about what's relevant, what's helpful. most of the time those companies are busy and they're just not that interested in sharing, and you've got to ask the right person in the right mood at the right time. And it's actually a lot of work, relative, and free work, and that's fine, but but it is, it's not so much the work involved, because I'll always grind a little harder to get something done. It's the nature of the question that's really the problem. And I think that's why we want to talk about it.
Yeah, or when you talk about benchmarking, I sometimes get what I call the overly specific benchmarking request, where somebody will say, hi, we are a producer of goat cheese in Vermont, and so we want to benchmark with another cheese producer in New England that's also got a left-handed CEO that's between 3 and 5 million in revenue and isn't around. And it's like, well, okay, you want to look in the mirror? Just look in the mirror.
Right. Yeah, and it's they assume they've picked the right. I mean, every organization has an infinite number of characteristics, and they've assumed that they've picked the right relevant 5 characteristics: size or fit or shape or years in the journey or whatever that might be.
Great point.
And chances are you haven't picked the most relevant criteria.
Yeah.
But the bigger problem is fundamentally that, and I'm, to be clear, I'm not against benchmarking. I think benchmarking can be done well. I think it's worth learning. But
I would propose there's a time and a place for it.
There's a time and a place, and there's a purpose, right? And copying the answer is not the purpose, right? And that, unfortunately, that's how people go forward and say, oh, well, we want, we're understanding the problem right now, and we have about 3 or 4 ideas, but we want to see if we can get that to 9 or 10 ideas. And so we're going to round out our idea set, right? That starts to make sense to me. But when they start looking for a copy solution, lean and management systems and operating systems and redesigning your work is about what you need it to do, right? And so there's a quote from the movie Jurassic Park that came to mind on this topic that I just love, and it speaks to the problem. This is what Jeff Goldblum says is, I'm not going to try to impersonate Jeff Goldblum. That's just, I don't have that kind of, I don't have that game. But says, I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourself, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew it, you had patented and packaged it and slapped it on a lunchbox, and now here we are, right?
Right.
And so that point around earning the knowledge is, I think, underappreciated. Even with people copying Toyota, what does Toyota do? Well, I don't care what Toyota does, because they've earned the knowledge about how their system works. They've earned that knowledge through experimentation and trial and study and immersion, and picking it up and copying and pasting it just never works.
Yeah. So I think 2 different ways I try to answer that question, that type of question when it comes in. So one is, like, if I know the organization has been working with lean for a while, I'll try to politely and constructively suggest, I think you have it in you to figure it out yourself, to use your A3 problem solving or your PDSA mindset. Instead of thinking like, what did some other organization do? Come back to the Toyota Kata question of like, what's the next experiment that you could run? Because I think, there's that risk of benchmarking where people sometimes go through great expense to gather this benchmarking information, and then they poo-poo what they get by saying, well, but we're very different. And like, well, why did you go through this exercise to benchmark and then throw aside the benchmarking? There's, I think, sometimes no excuse. I think it's interesting, that framing of, it'll be better if you earn it yourself. The second way I'll answer the question is, kind of saying, well, let's schedule a phone call to talk about your situation. So as a consultant, if I can be helpful with somebody in a relatively short phone call and prompt their thinking, maybe inspire them to go experiment and figure it out for themselves, that's fine. Sometimes, we might propose, can I coach you to help you figuring it out and try to add value to an organization that way?
Yeah. And I again, there's nothing wrong with studying other organizations, looking for answers elsewhere, right? But as part of a discipline study, and quite frankly, at best, you're going to be second best, right? And I'm not saying you have to be best at everything. I'm not, sometimes you have a problem where it's just all I want to do is make this go away. This is not about excellence. This is about avoiding, crappy problems. But if all you do, if that's your first thought, you'll never be best. You'll never excel as an organization because, what's special about you is better somewhere else. And so if you want to build an organization that gets good at making improvements, that is special because of what it does, it's really not, it's not even about doing something different from what other people do, but it is about that ownership and that connectivity, because whatever your solution is, it's going to break, right? It's going to falter. It's going to be obsolete. And if you don't even understand why it works the way that it does, you're ill prepared to troubleshoot, problem solve, and improve.
And I think, people want to be like Toyota. And Toyota learned from Henry Ford. They learned from the Piggly Wiggly supermarket chain in the US. Like, I don't mean to be dismissive of learning from others, but I think there's a difference between, let's say, learning and being inspired to figure it out yourself, or being inspired to take some learning and then build upon it, adopt and adapt, right? Building upon it and making it your own, I think, creates that sense of ownership more so than saying, oh, we're going to implement what Toyota did, or people in healthcare would say, no, we're going to implement what ThedaCare did, or point used to do.
And I think using it to inspire your creativity, inspire your thought process. Like we had recorded this video series with Math Tech on reimagining government processes through the pandemic, or through the pandemic period. And I remember one of the examples we talked about, what if you took the DMV and you asked, how would Chick-fil-A run this? Well, differently, probably, right? Or what if you took the revenue department and asked, how would Amazon run this? Well, probably differently. And so you're learning from or being inspired by that thought process of another organization. You're looking at an idea and saying, what does this inform us about our situation? So a learning mindset is paramount to effective benchmarking, as opposed to a quick fix.
And so you prompt me my last thought on this subject. A lot of times people want the overly specific, looking in the mirror, benchmarking an organization exactly like them approach. I have heard of some of healthcare organizations that will go and visit Japan, and they very intentionally do not want to visit a Japanese hospital. They go to visit Japanese manufacturing companies that are very unlike them, because the theory, the principle is, it's going to stretch our thinking, and then we're going to have to think about what we've learned and saw and adapt it to our own needs. Where if you go and visit other hospitals, there's that risk of, let's copy, right? So I've been part of trips where we've gone with hospitals, and we've done both. We've gone to hospitals, we've gone to manufacturing companies. I can really see the argument for only going to manufacturing companies, because there's that risk of when hospital people get into a Japanese hospital, they want to discuss and see the hospital-y things instead of the lean concepts. And I think that's the risk where maybe upon reflection, it's just interesting to think about, like, which environment really creates the most learning. That, yes, I think you want to see one in that kind of scenario, one Japanese hospital, so you can see what's similar and what's different. That's
Right.
part of the broadening your world perspective. But
And when I ran my old consulting firm with Andy Carlino, we looked at, we would get questions all the time. Well, how do you compare to this competitor and this competitor? And I honestly could say, I have no idea, because I don't spend much time looking at what they do.
right.
I look at what our customers do. I look at what our customers need, and that's what we try to solve for. If I wanted to be like everybody else, I would have just gotten a job with one of them, right? So I was pretty ignorant about what our competitors were doing to solve the problems, because there wasn't a way to excel just by copying those answers. We had to earn our solutions to our customers' problems ourselves.
And then, okay, one final thought. Then there's the risk of benchmarking results. And I think of next week through the work I do with Valley Capture, we're going to be publishing a free ebook. It's a PDF of some transcripts of speeches given by the late Paul O'Neill. And he taught, and knowing the history of what Alcoa did, they learned from Toyota.
Mm-hmm.
They had a partnership with Steve Spear and others at Harvard Business School, and they looked to other companies. But Paul O'Neill emphasized setting goals at what he called the theoretical limit of performance.
Right.
And I think the risk of benchmarking another organization's performance is that target almost becomes a limit. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
we're organizations say we want to be in the top decile of some healthcare metric. I'm like, well, why don't you aim for perfection? And using that as an aspirational, inspirational goal, which requires a certain leadership style for people to not feel beaten up, proverbially for not hitting the goal of perfection. But I think that's the one other risk about benchmarking is don't just be satisfied with someone else's results. You were saying similar things, I think.
Yeah, and most people, when I see them try to do that, it's interesting, because I remember one study, an organization said, well, you're going to go benchmark a sister factory, and function by function, they all came back with their productivity reports, but every single one of them said, here's 3 reasons why their numbers are look better than they really are. And here's 3 reasons why our numbers look worse than they really are. So even though they look better than us, it's really a tie, or we're better. They spent so much time explaining the numbers, they never really learned from them.
Okay, I can't get off this topic. So I'm having flashbacks, PTSD, to my time at General Motors. Livonia engine plant, 1995. There were benchmarking studies looking at the productivity metric of hours per engine. And the plant I was in, our hours per engine was really high, meaning it was bad, compared to a Ford plant and a Toyota plant. And so they thought the Ford plant was the apples to apples comparison. Similar products, similar technology, it was Detroit automaker. And I figured, well, the point of benchmarking is to identify the gap so we can close the gap. What I hated is I was being asked as an industrial engineer to explain the gap, to rationalize the gap. Like, oh, well, their volume is higher, so therefore their productivity has to be better. And
right.
This is not what I want to do in my career.
No, just
explaining away the differences.
Yep, that's right out of a Dilbert cartoon for sure.
It was. So.
Well, that's how we got where we are today with some of those companies for sure. So,
fleeing that led me to MIT, and that led to all kinds of other good things. If I've been too happy and comfortable at GM.
Yep, I can't imagine you still there. That's for sure. All right, so we'll wrap that up.
All right, cool, good discussion. So, I always kind of wrap up with kind of a random question, non-lean related question. So this time the question is, what are you reading right now? Jamie, if you want to go first.
Yeah. So let me start by saying that I used to do 80% of my reading on planes. That's where I got my reading done, and I really had to adjust.
Yeah.
my reading dropped, and been picking it back up by changing my system of work because it broke.
Mhm.
I'll share two books. One, I recently just finished a book. I always have a couple going at a time, depending on my mood on topic. But finished the book, The Invincible Company, which is in the same series as the Business Model Canvas kind of strategy series. Okay book, not great. I think if you're deep into Business Model Canvas work, it's a good library of some ideas. But I'm not sure I learned a lot from it. But the book I'm into now, I love really going deep into history in various little veins. And I don't think I have a particular genre of history that I like. Just I love history. So I'm reading a book called The Map of Knowledge, and it traces how knowledge evolved from society to society, from person to person, from city to city, right? Because society wasn't just empires; it was also heavily based on cities. Really starts in I don't know exactly what year 500, goes past the year 1000, but that's the kind of era that it's talking about, where they spent a lot of time tracing specific knowledge from the Greeks forward and seeing who translated copies of books and who advanced them and built on them, and what books were used for centuries, and why, what about the conditions made it ripe for knowledge to create. So it covers, each chapter is a different city and a different time. It kind of has what was the epicenter of knowledge of the world. So we covered Baghdad, Cordoba. I'm in the reading about Toledo right now. I'm still in that chapter.
Toledo,
And
Ohio?
no. In Spain. It followed along Cordoba after Cordoba was conquered.
No offense to listeners from Toledo. I was
No.
curious.
But I think it's fair to say it wasn't it's not the center of knowledge of the world right now or ever. So.
And now a word from our sponsor, the Toledo Chamber of Commerce. Dang it.
Yeah, probably not.
Another
The Toledo
lost
Mud
sponsor.
Hens. Mud Hens don't exist anymore either, so I don't think they do. But what's interesting is how much some of this was run by kingdoms. Some of this was run by private libraries. It really was, especially in the readings about Baghdad. Today, I don't know about today, but you have a Ferrari and that's your sign of wealth, or a Aston Martin, or a second home in Greece, or whatever it is, right? Whatever the status symbol is. Back then it was having a library and inviting scholars to your private library to study. That was the status symbol. And what a great status symbol, right? It really definitely led to the both the preservation and the advancement of knowledge. And it's not the easiest book to read. I kind of get the sense that it's an extension of someone's PhD thesis, but the content is fascinating, and I'm really enjoying The Map of Knowledge. So what are you up reading these days?
Well, cool. So in a roundabout way, I'll tell you about a different book I've been reading about history. So, in some of my own kind of, explorations and reflection of, kind of current societal topics, or at least current discussion of longstanding topics. I had started reading the book How to Be an Anti-Racist. And I was reading it, and it was interesting, but I was kind of thinking this question of some of the history of where do some of these structures or racist thoughts or systems come from. And so I Googled, I think I just literally typed, as people do in the Google, what is the history of racism? And sure enough, a different book by Ibram X. Kendi, his previous book before How to Be an Anti-Racist was called Stamped from the Beginning. So it's not light reading. It's an important topic, but it goes back through, dates back to late 1500s,
Okay.
pre-American history.
Sure.
But it like different chapters focus on different figures in American history. So Cotton Mather, who you might remember from U.S. history class, of kind of early colonial preachers and religious figures. And then I'm currently into the section now that's exploring Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
So kind of moving from the secular realm to the non-secular governmental political realm. So I'm going to continue reading that. It's kind of heavy, but it helps scratch that itch of saying, well, how did we get to where we are today? Not an overnight problem. Again, no overnight solutions to it, but I think understanding that history has been eye-opening and interesting. So I definitely recommend that book. I hear that one talked about far less than his more recent book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So again, that other book is stamped from the beginning.
Excellent. And actually, interestingly, my wife is reading How to Be an Anti-Racist. He came and I think, if I remember correctly, he came and spoke at Lehigh, where both my wife and I went last year. And I don't know if she ended up with a copy or just familiar with his work. And so she's reading that, and I hope to read it when she's done. Very interesting topic. And I think we won't go into the topic now as we wrap up, but not being racist and being anti-racist are two different things. And I think that's the whole point of the book.
I think, one is passive, saying, well, I don't say or do overtly racist things, but that's different than taking actions to help improve society for all.
Exactly. And I think I really hope to look at your blog in the coming week with that particular premise in mind, of what I can learn and what I can do. Even if I do it poorly or do it not enough, I want to do it better, and great opportunity to learn. So
learning, reflecting, and growing, and in some of the conversations I've had recently on this topic with Black colleagues, this idea of leaning into the discomfort. Mm-hmm. We grow through discomfort. A lot of times we feel discomfort and we back away. And as I actually earlier interviewed a Black woman who's a healthcare executive. This is for the Habitual Excellence podcast through Value Capture. And she said, basically, she was the discomfort you and I, Jamie, might feel reading about and thinking about and talking about these topics. That's nothing compared to the discomfort that some people in this country face every day and feel every day. So
just driving down the street, and I know we're kind of back into the topic, but it's hard not to be. So I saw a post by Randy Pinkett that we talked about earlier. He did a great video on the myths of racism, and he actually finished with one that's a key point I've always made from a lean perspective, which is you can't learn inside your comfort zone, right? So you have to get outside your comfort zone in order to learn. If you're inside your comfort zone, that's the stuff you already know. And this was kind of his ending point, was if this is uncomfortable, that's good. That's okay, because that's the only way that we learn and grow. And that's the point of any book, right? Since we're finishing on books here. And it's the point of lean, because lean is all about learning. So I think this all starts to connect. And if we're not about continuous improvement about ourselves, we can't be about continuous improvement of other people and other organizations.
Sure. So we can think about an ideal state or a target condition, but then the next question is, what's the next experiment that we can run personally or as an organization, and see if that makes things, at least takes us a step toward that ideal condition.
We will actively aspire.
Yeah. So, all right. Fun as always, Jamie. Good discussions, heavy topics at times, but, always enjoy talking to you, and hopefully people enjoy listening. So, we do want to give a few reminders as we wrap up here. If you want to check out all episodes, You can go to leanwhiskey.com. You can spell whiskey K-E-Y at the end or K-Y at the end. Both of those forward to a page on my website. And then you can also go to Jamie's website at...
Yep, which is jflinch.com/leanwhiskey.
And, we ask you, I mean, if you're watching us on YouTube and you want to subscribe as a podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, other places. If you are listening, we're doing these as video podcasts. I think this is a new habit and a new standard, right?
It certainly seems to be a new standard because, why not? We're on video anyway, so we can see each other. So it's been I think it's worked.
Yeah, so you can find us on YouTube. They've all been on my channel. We'll talk offline, Jamie, if we're going to put some of these on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, people know how to find us one way or the other, so.
Sure. And go check out Jamie's videos. You mentioned earlier, if people go search for Jay Flinch on YouTube.
Yeah, Jay Flinch or my name, either way, they'll find my channel. And, whether it's YouTube or Spotify or Google Play or Apple, whatever you listen or watch, please subscribe, so you find out when we release new stuff. Rate us, review us. It helps us. It helps other listeners find us. We really do appreciate that. It's not just it's not an ego trip. It really does kind of help people find content that might benefit them or that they might enjoy. And so, we don't have any targets for how many people we want to reach, but we love sharing with people. That's in both of our natures. And please help us do that. Even if you just tell a friend, always appreciate the help.
And if you're watching on YouTube, the thing I'm supposed to do is to point down. I don't know if I'm pointing at the right place, but
maybe I have to do it over here.
You can subscribe and also turn on notifications.
I think notifications might be up there or something. Notifications is down. Okay, so yeah, so notifications are great, and and their next episode is going to actually be live, not for our listeners, but with the Colorado Lean Network. Our next episode will be for attendees of the conference. We will do an episode live with those attendees and a couple of co-hosts from the Colorado Lean Network. And then, as always, we'll share that episode through the regular channels that we just talked about.
Well, and I think this is actually happening before the Colorado Lean Network episode. I'm going to be recording a podcast with a guy I know, Cliff Hazel, who's actually in Sweden. So we're going to be recording it some weekend where I think it's going to be noon for me and relatively late evening for him. Cliff, I met at the Lean Coaching Summit a couple of years ago. He was in Austin. We had a drink together with our mutual friend Jim Benson. So that's kind of the criteria, right? If we've talked lean over whiskey with someone in person, they can come on the podcast, right?
Yep, I think that's about right.
Yeah. So I hope people look forward to those other episodes. Jamie, I poured another half ounce. I saved another sip. I hope people aren't watching. Like, Mark took more sips than Jamie.
I don't think that's the conclusion they would have reached. I had some pretty hefty pours that I'm about to finish my second. So, all
right. So anyway, I saved enough to toast. Cheers, Jamie. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.